The medical bay of the Galactic Council station hummed with soft blue light as Dr. Cathara examined her most unusual patient. The being before her was small by galactic standards, standing barely 2 meters tall with pale skin and strange patches of hair on its head. Most unsettling were its forward-facing eyes, a trait shared only by the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The human called itself Marcus Chen, and it had been found floating in a damaged escape pod 3 cycles ago. Its ship bore no markings that matched any known civilization, and the technology was primitive yet oddly effective. When the rescue team brought the creature aboard, many had whispered fears about harboring a dangerous unknown species. Dr. Cathara was a Vorthak, her forearms perfectly suited for medical work, and her species had seen every form of violence the galaxy offered. The Vorthak were known as the finest military historians and combat analysts in the known systems. If anyone could understand this strange creature's background, it would be her. "The scars tell a story," she murmured to her assistant, Dr. Ril N., a peaceful Minari whose people had never known war. The human's body was covered in marks that spoke of violence beyond anything she had catalogued. "Look at this pattern here along the ribs. These are not from accidents or natural causes." Marcus had been unconscious for 2 days, his body fighting off infections from wounds that should have killed any civilized species. The medical scanners revealed something even more disturbing. His bone density was 3 times that of most sapient species. His muscle fibers were dense and efficient, built for explosive movement. Even his blood carried more oxygen than seemed possible. "Doctor," Rillen whispered, her voice trembling. "The bone analysis came back. Some of these fractures, they're from projectile impacts, high-velocity metal fragments. How could any being survive such trauma?" Before Dr. Cathara could respond, the human's eyes opened. They were brown like dried earth, and they moved with the calculating precision she had seen in apex predators. Marcus sat up slowly, his movements controlled despite obvious pain. "Where am I?" His voice was rough but steady. The translation device struggled with his language, identifying it as a complex system called English. "You are safe," Dr. Cathara replied carefully. "I am Dr. Cathara of the Galactic Council Medical Division. You were found in a damaged escape pod. What is your species designation?" Marcus looked around the medical bay, taking in every detail. His eyes noted the positions of doors, medical equipment, and the 2 doctors. Even injured, he was cataloging potential weapons and escape routes. "Human," he said simply. "From Earth." Neither doctor had heard of this world, but Dr. Cathara made careful notes. "What happened to your vessel?" Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a darkness that made both doctors step back instinctively. "We were defending a colony, outer rim world called Haven's Rest. The Zorith Dominion decided they wanted the planet's rare minerals." Dr. Cathara's blood chilled. She knew of the Zorith Dominion, a ruthless empire that had conquered 17 systems in the past century. They were known for their massive fleets and overwhelming firepower. No species had ever successfully defended against them. "The Zorith attacked your colony?" she asked carefully. Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. 15 billion people lived on Haven's Rest. Families, children, old folks who just wanted to tend their gardens and watch their grandkids grow up. The Zorith gave them 6 hours to evacuate before the bombardment began. "Did your people evacuate in time?" Dr. Rillen asked hopefully. Marcus's laugh was bitter and cold. The Zorith lied. They started bombing the evacuation sites first. Shot down the transport ships as they tried to leave atmosphere. They wanted to make sure no one escaped to tell others what happened. Dr. Cathara felt sick. Even in her extensive study of galactic warfare, such deliberate cruelty was rare. "How many of your people survived?" "On Haven's Rest?" "None." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands clenched into fists. "But the Zorith made one mistake. They thought because we were new to the galaxy, because we had small ships and simple weapons, that we would break easily." The human slowly stood, ignoring the medical sensors that began beeping warnings. His posture was straight despite his injuries, and there was something in his stance that made both doctors realize they were not looking at prey, but at something far more dangerous. "I was part of the 3rd Colonial Defense Fleet," Marcus continued. 26 ships, mostly destroyers and frigates. Old designs built in orbital yards around Earth. The Zorith fleet had over 300 vessels, including 5 dreadnoughts. Dr. Cathara knew those numbers meant certain defeat for the humans. Zorith dreadnoughts were mobile fortresses capable of destroying planets. Your fleet must have retreated to preserve your forces. Marcus shook his head. Admiral Reyes called a fleet meeting, told us what the Zorith had done to the civilians, showed us the recordings from the surface before the communications went dark. His eyes seemed to look through the walls, seeing something far away and terrible. Children running from burning schools, medical centers bombed while still full of patients. The Zorith troops laughing as they hunted survivors through the ruins. What did your fleet do? Dr. Rillen whispered. We voted, Marcus said simply. Every ship's crew, every officer, every enlisted soldier. The vote was unanimous. He looked directly at Dr. Kithara, and she saw something in those predator eyes that made her understand why his species had survived long enough to reach the stars. We decided that the Zorith fleet would never make it home to tell their empire what they had learned about human worlds, never get the chance to do to another colony what they did to Haven's Rest. The medical bay fell silent except for the humming of equipment. Dr. Kethara realized she was holding her breath. In all her years studying warfare, she had never seen such quiet, controlled rage in any sapient being. 26 ships against 300, she said softly. Marcus nodded. The Zorith commanders probably thought we were bringing surrender terms when we approached their fleet. His smile was sharp and cold. They were wrong. The doctors exchanged glances. Dr. Kethara had seen the humans' escape pod, had analyzed the battle damage and energy signatures. Whatever had happened in that system, it had involved weapons and tactics beyond anything in the current galactic military databases. What happened next? She asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Marcus looked out the viewport at the stars beyond the station. What happened next, Doctor, is why I'm the only survivor they'll ever find from that battle. And why the Galactic Council needs to understand what humanity is really capable of when you threaten the people we protect. The next morning brought new visitors to the medical bay. Commander Thexel of Station Security arrived with 3 armed guards, their plasma rifles held ready but not quite aimed at Marcus. The Keltheran officer's scaled hide showed the deep blue patterns that indicated serious concern among his people. Dr. Kethara intercepted them before they could approach her patient. Commander, this being is under medical protection. He has committed no crimes and poses no threat. That remains to be determined, Thexel replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Council intelligence has been analyzing the debris field where we found his pod. The energy signatures are disturbing. Marcus sat on the edge of the medical bed, apparently unconcerned by the armed presence. He was eating from a ration pack Dr. Rillen had provided, though he had politely declined most of the standard galactic foods. His digestive system, it seemed, was as unusual as everything else about him. What kind of energy signatures? Dr. Kethara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Commander Thexel activated a holographic display. The image showed a star system, but something was wrong. Where planets should have been, there were only expanding clouds of debris. Asteroid belts that looked too uniform, too scattered to be natural. The Zorith held this system for 40 years, Thexel explained. It contained their primary naval academy, 3 major shipyards, and a fortress moon that served as sector command. Population: approximately 2 billion Zorith military personnel and their families. Marcus continued eating, showing no reaction to the display. And now? Dr. Kethara asked, though the answer was obvious from the image. Gone. Everything. The planets have been cracked apart. The star itself shows signs of induced instability. Our sensors detect residual radiation from weapons we cannot identify. The entire system has been rendered uninhabitable for the next 10,000 years. Dr. Rillen made a soft sound of horror. 2 billion beings. The Zorith military command structure in this entire sector has been eliminated. Thexal continued. 15 dreadnoughts, 47 heavy cruisers, over 200 smaller vessels, all destroyed. But here's what really concerns intelligence. He manipulated the display, zooming in on specific debris patterns. The wreckage shows signs of close-quarters combat. Ramming attacks, boarding actions. This wasn't a long-range bombardment. Marcus finally looked up from his meal. You want to know how 26 human ships destroyed a Zorith sector fleet? We want to know how 26 primitive vessels somehow eliminated one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Commander Thexel said carefully. Our analysts say it should have been impossible. Marcus stood and walked to the viewport. Beyond the transparent aluminum, The Galactic Council Station bustled with activity. Hundreds of species worked together, traded, negotiated, a peaceful civilization that had known relative stability for centuries. "Your analysts think like civilized people," Marcus said quietly. "The Zorith made the same mistake." "Explain," Thexel demanded. Marcus turned back to face the room. "Tell me, Commander, what do your people do when faced with an overwhelming enemy force?" "Standard tactical doctrine calls for strategic withdrawal, regrouping, and calling for reinforcements," Thexal replied promptly. "Logical, reasonable, civilized." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Now let me tell you what humans do when someone murders 15 billion of our people, including children." His expression hardened. "We stop being civilized." Dr. Kethara felt a chill run through her forearms. "What do you mean?" "The Zorith expected us to behave rationally, to preserve our forces, minimize losses, follow standard military doctrine. They positioned their fleet in a defensive formation around their command station, waiting for us to either attack predictably or withdraw." Marcus activated the room's secondary display, somehow interfacing with it despite having no apparent knowledge of Council technology. Images appeared showing human ship designs, crude but functional compared to galactic standards. Our ships were smaller, weaker, less advanced, but they had something the Zorith didn't account for. He highlighted specific systems on the ship schematics. Our fusion reactors weren't just power sources. They were bombs. Very big bombs. Commander Thexal's scales shifted to a pattern Dr. Kethara recognized as deep unease. "You weaponized your own power systems?" "Every human ship has the capability to overload its reactor in an emergency. It's a standard safety protocol, designed to prevent capture by hostile forces, but it can also be used offensively." The display changed, showing tactical formations. We divided our fleet into 3 groups. The first group, 8 ships, approached the Zorith formation openly. They targeted the dreadnoughts, drawing defensive fire, absorbing massive damage. Marcus's voice remained steady, professional. When their shields failed and their hulls began to breach, they didn't retreat. "What did they do?" Dr. Rillen whispered. "They accelerated. Full power to engines straight at the largest Zorith vessels. When they reached ramming distance, they overloaded their reactors. The silence in the medical bay was deafening." Dr. Kethara tried to imagine the scene. Human ships, crippled and dying, choosing to become guided missiles rather than accept defeat. 8 fusion reactors, Marcus continued, detonating in close proximity to Zorith dreadnoughts. The explosions crippled their primary fleet elements and disrupted their defensive formation. "And the other 2 groups?" Thexal asked, though his voice suggested he dreaded the answer. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "While the Zorith were dealing with the reactor explosions, our second group launched boarding pods. Not at their ships, but at their command station." "Boarding a fortress?" Dr. Kethara couldn't hide her shock. "That's suicide against Zorith defenses. Under normal circumstances, yes. But fortress defenses are designed to stop ships, not individual soldiers. And human soldiers, Commander, are very good at individual combat." The display showed cross-sections of typical Zorith station designs. Marcus highlighted corridors, defensive positions, command centers. 60 human Marines breached their command station. They fought through 15 levels of Zorith defenders, reached the primary command center, and transmitted the station's shield frequencies and tactical data to our remaining ships. 60 soldiers against an entire fortress? Thexel's voice carried disbelief. 43 of them died in the first hour, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. 17 made it to the command center. 12 survived long enough to complete the mission. His eyes met Thexel's. All 60 knew it was a one-way mission when they volunteered. Dr. Kethara realized she was trembling. The casual way this human described such sacrifice, such violence, was unlike anything in her experience. "The third group?" she managed to ask. Marcus's expression became distant. 10 ships, including mine. Once we had the shield frequencies, we could target specific systems on the Zorith vessels. We focused on their life support, their emergency systems, their escape pods. You prevented them from evacuating. The Zorith showed no mercy to the civilians on Haven's Rest, Marcus said simply. We decided to return the favor. No Zorith ship was allowed to leave the system. No escape pods were permitted to reach safe distance. No distress signals were allowed to transmit. Commander Thexal's scales had shifted to patterns Dr. Kethara had never seen before. Colors that spoke of deep, primal fear. You committed total genocide of their military forces. We eliminated a threat to human colonies, Marcus corrected, and we sent a message to the rest of the Zorith Dominion about what happens when they target our civilians. The medical bay fell silent again. Finally, Dr. Cathara found her voice. How did you survive? If no human ships escaped, Marcus looked back out at the stars. I didn't escape, Doctor. I was sent. My ship was chosen to carry word of what happened to the galactic community, to make sure everyone understands what humanity is capable of when pushed too far. A warning, Thexal said quietly. A promise, Marcus replied. 3 days later, the Galactic Council chambers buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 47 member species had gathered for an emergency session, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic vibrations. At the center of the great circular hall, a holographic display showed the devastated Zorith system. Its planets reduced to glowing debris fields. Ambassador Veltar of the Arcturian Federation called for order, with a resonant tone that quieted the assembly. Her species had served as mediators for centuries, their natural telepathic abilities making them ideal peacekeepers. Today, however, even her usually calm demeanor showed cracks of uncertainty. Fellow council members, she began, her translated words reaching every being present. We face an unprecedented situation. A previously unknown species has demonstrated military capabilities that challenge our understanding of civilized warfare. In the observation gallery above, Marcus sat between Dr. Kithara and Commander Thexal. The human wore simple gray clothing provided by the station, looking unremarkable compared to the exotic forms filling the chamber below. Yet every council member who had seen the intelligence reports kept glancing upward at him with mixtures of curiosity and fear. Council security had wanted to place Marcus in isolation, but Dr. Kethara had insisted on his presence. If you're going to judge humanity, she had argued, you should at least hear from a human. Ambassador Crixon of the Hegemony stood first, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns. The data speaks for itself. This species demonstrates a level of destructive capability that threatens galactic stability. I motion for immediate classification as a hostile entity. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several delegations. The hegemony controlled 12 systems and maintained strict order through technological superiority. The idea of a species willing to sacrifice entire fleets for tactical advantage clearly disturbed them. The human destroyed an entire system, Crixon continued. 15 dreadnoughts, hundreds of support vessels, billions of lives. This level of destruction suggests a species with no regard for proportional response or civilized conduct. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his attention focused on the crystalline being. Dr. Kethera noticed his hands remained relaxed, but there was something in his posture that reminded her of a predator watching potential prey. Ambassador Lithara of the Peaceful Assembly raised a tentacle in request to speak. Her aquatic species had never engaged in warfare, preferring diplomatic solutions to all conflicts. Perhaps we should consider the provocation. The Zorith attack on the human colony was undeniably brutal. Provocation does not justify genocide, Crixon replied sharply. Civilized species respond to aggression with measured force, not complete annihilation. Measured force? Marcus's voice carried clearly from the gallery, despite the chamber's acoustics being designed to minimize disruption from observers. Every council member turned to look up at him. Ambassador Veltar consulted her protocols, then nodded. The human will be permitted to address the assembly. Security escort him to the speaker's platform. Commander Thexal and 2 guards flanked Marcus as he descended to the chamber floor. The human moved with easy confidence, showing no signs of intimidation despite facing the combined leadership of galactic civilization. When he reached the speaker's platform, he stood quietly for a moment, his brown eyes scanning the assembled delegates. Honored council members, he began. I understand your concern. From your perspective, humanity's actions seem extreme, disproportionate. You've built a civilization based on negotiation, compromise, measured response to aggression. Ambassador Veltar used her telepathic abilities to sense the emotional undertones of the assembly. Fear dominated, but there was also curiosity about this small, unremarkable-looking being who had somehow survived the destruction of an entire Zorith fleet. Your civilization has achieved something remarkable, Marcus continued. Peace between species, trade instead of war, diplomatic solutions to territorial disputes. You should be proud of what you've built here. Several delegates relaxed slightly. Perhaps the human would prove reasonable after all. But your success has created a blind spot, Marcus said, his tone shifting subtly. You've forgotten what it's like to face an enemy that doesn't share your values. An enemy that views your civilization not as something to negotiate with, but as something to consume. The Zorith delegate, Ambassador Krexval, rose from his position. The reptilian being's scaled hide showed the deep red patterns of indignation. The human makes accusations against my people based on isolated incidents. The Zorith Dominion has always followed established protocols for territorial expansion. Marcus turned to face the Zorith. Directly, Dr. Kithara noticed that several other delegates unconsciously moved away from the human, as if sensing danger. Established protocols, Marcus repeated slowly. Is that what you call bombing evacuation sites? Hunting civilian survivors through burning cities? Recording the executions of children for entertainment? Ambassador Krexval's hide shifted to darker patterns. Military actions in hostile territory require decisive measures. The Zorith do not target non-combatants without cause. I have recordings, Marcus said simply, from the surface of Haven's Rest. From the ships your forces shot down while they carried families trying to escape. Would the Council like to see what Zorith decisive measures actually look like? The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Veltar felt waves of discomfort from the assembled delegates. Many had heard rumors about Zorith expansion methods, but few had seen direct evidence. That won't be necessary, Ambassador Veltar said quickly. The Council accepts that the Zorith attack on your colony was regrettable. Regrettable. Marcus smiled, but the expression held no warmth. 15 billion human lives, men, women, children, elderly, infants, all reduced to regrettable in the interest of diplomatic language. He walked slowly around the speaker's platform, his movement forcing delegates to track him with their various sensory organs. Let me tell you what humanity learned from Haven's Rest. We learned that your galactic civilization, for all its achievements, has one fundamental flaw. And what is that? Ambassador Crixon asked, his crystalline form resonating with harmonic skepticism. Marcus stopped walking and faced the assembly directly. You've become so civilized that you've forgotten how to fight monsters. The Zorith aren't the only predatory species out there. They're just the ones who got caught. Uncomfortable silence filled the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances, remembering reports of other aggressive species beyond the galaxy's borders. Humans evolved differently, Marcus continued. Our homeworld was harsh, competitive. We had to fight for everything: territory, resources, survival itself. We learned to be both civilized and savage, depending on what the situation required. You speak as if violence is something to be proud of, Ambassador Lithara said, her aquatic voice carrying disapproval. I speak of violence as a tool, Marcus replied. Like fire, it can destroy or protect depending on how it's used. The Zorith brought violence to Haven's Rest. They chose to make war on our civilians, our children, our innocent. His voice carried across the chamber with quiet intensity. So humanity showed them what real violence looks like. Not the sanitized, rule-bound warfare your council recognizes, but the raw, unforgiving violence that evolution taught us, the kind that doesn't stop until the threat is completely eliminated. Ambassador Krexval's hide showed patterns of rage. You admit to war crimes. Genocide of military personnel. Marcus turned to the Zorith delegate, and Dr. Kethera saw something in the human's eyes that made her understand why predators were so feared throughout the galaxy. I admit to ending a threat, Marcus said softly. Your sector fleet will never again bomb evacuation sites. They'll never again hunt children through burning schools. They'll never again laugh while recording the executions of innocent families. Because you murdered them all, Krexval snarled. Because they chose to make themselves into monsters, Marcus replied. And humanity has had millions of years of practice dealing with monsters. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates began arguing among themselves. Some called for Marcus's immediate arrest. Others demanded investigation into Zorith expansion methods. Through it all, the humans stood calmly at the speaker's platform, waiting for order to return. Ambassador Veltar finally restored quiet. The council will recess to consider all evidence. Security will escort the human back to medical quarters pending our decision. As Marcus was led away, he paused at the chamber's exit and looked back at the assembled delegates. Council members, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance. Humanity didn't come to your galaxy looking for war. We came looking for trade, knowledge, friendship, but we brought war with us anyway because sometimes friendship isn't enough. What do you mean? Ambassador Veltar called out. Marcus smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. Because sometimes, honored ambassador, the only way to protect what you love is to become something your enemies fear more than death itself. The private conference room adjoining the council chambers held an atmosphere thick with tension. 5 hours had passed since Marcus's address to the full assembly, and now the inner circle of council leadership sat around a curved table, reviewing classified intelligence reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Ambassador Veltar manipulated the holographic display with practiced ease, bringing up star charts showing the Outer Rim territories. Red markers indicated Zorth-controlled systems, while new yellow indicators marked recent communication blackouts and missing reconnaissance patrols. The situation is evolving rapidly, she announced to the assembled inner council. In the 72 hours since the Zorth sector fleet was destroyed, we've lost contact with 3 border monitoring stations and 2 diplomatic missions. General Korath of the Council Defense Force leaned forward, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak ominously. The Betharian military leader had commanded galactic peacekeeping forces for 2 decades, and his scarred hide bore witness to numerous conflicts with rogue systems. The Zorth High Command is mobilizing, he rumbled in his deep voice. Long-range sensors detect massive fleet movements from their core systems. Conservative estimates place their response force at over 800 vessels, including 12 super dreadnoughts. Ambassador Crixon's crystalline form refracted nervous patterns of light. They're preparing to eliminate the human threat before it can spread. Standard Zorth doctrine calls for overwhelming force when dealing with unknown capabilities. Which brings us to the central question, interjected Ambassador Orthani of the Trader Consortium. The diminutive being's large eyes showed concern for the economic implications. How many humans are there? 1 system? 10? The economic disruption from a full-scale interstellar war could collapse the Outer Rim trade networks. The question hung in the air. Despite 3 days of interrogation and analysis, human capabilities remained largely unknown. Marcus had provided basic information about his species' expansion into space, but the numbers seemed impossible to verify. The human claims his species has established colonies on 47 worlds, General Korath said, consulting his tactical datapad. Population estimates range from 20 to 50 billion individuals across multiple star systems. And their military strength? Ambassador Veltar asked, unknown. The human speaks of defense fleets but provides no specific numbers. When pressed, he simply says that humanity believes in being prepared for trouble. Dr. Kithara, who had been granted special access to the inner council due to her extensive contact with Marcus, activated her own display. I've been analyzing the wreckage patterns from the destroyed Zorth fleet. The weapon signatures don't match any known technology, but they're not particularly advanced either. Explain, General Korath commanded. Human weapons appear to be variations on nuclear fusion reactions, kinetic projectiles, and directed energy beams. Nothing exotic, nothing beyond current galactic understanding. The difference lies in application and tactics. She manipulated the display to show detailed scans of destroyed Zorth vessels. Look at these impact patterns. The humans didn't just destroy the ships. They systematically targeted life support, communication arrays, and escape systems. Every shot was calculated to maximize psychological impact on survivors. Ambassador Crixon's light patterns shifted to deep unease. Psychological warfare on this scale suggests extensive military planning. This wasn't a spontaneous response to aggression. That's what concerns me most, Dr. Kithara admitted. Marcus speaks of the battle as if it followed established human doctrine. They have protocols for this kind of total warfare. They've planned for fighting against overwhelming odds. The inner council fell silent, contemplating the implications. A species that had developed doctrine for genocide-level warfare was far more dangerous than one that had simply committed an isolated atrocity. Ambassador Veltar opened a secure communication channel. Bring the human to the conference room. We need direct answers. Minutes later, Marcus entered accompanied by Commander Thexol and 2 guards. The human showed no signs of fatigue despite days of constant questioning. If anything, he seemed more alert, more focused than before. Sit, General Korath commanded, indicating a chair facing the council members. Marcus remained standing. I prefer to stand, General. Thank you. The refusal was polite but absolute, and several council members recognized it as a subtle assertion of independence. This human would not be intimidated by formal protocol or military authority. We've been analyzing the intelligence you've provided, Ambassador Veltar began carefully. However, significant questions remain about human capabilities and intentions. Ask your questions, Marcus replied simply. General Korath activated his tactical display. Long-range sensors show massive Zorith fleet movements. Conservative estimates suggest they're preparing a retaliatory strike with over 800 vessels. How will humanity respond to this level of threat? Marcus studied the fleet disposition charts with professional interest. That's a significant force. The Zorith are taking us seriously. That's not an answer, Ambassador Crixon interjected. Can humanity defend against such numbers? The Zorith made a mistake at Haven's Rest, Marcus said quietly. They assumed that because we're new to galactic politics, we must be weak. They're making another mistake now, which is? Ambassador Veltar prompted. Marcus turned to face the full council. They assumed that what happened to their sector fleet was the limit of human capability. That 26 ships represented a significant portion of our military strength. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Cathara felt her 4 hearts begin racing as the implications became clear. How many ships does humanity actually possess? General Korath asked, though his voice suggested he dreaded the answer. The Colonial Defense Force maintains active fleets around 47 human worlds, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. The 3rd Colonial Fleet that engaged at Haven's Rest was considered one of our smaller formations. Ambassador Orthani's large eyes widened. Smaller formations? How many ships constitute a full human fleet? That depends on the mission profile. A standard colonial defense fleet typically fields between 60 and 120 vessels. Heavy assault fleets are larger. The numbers didn't match galactic norms. Most species maintain small, technologically superior fleets. The idea of multiple formations, each larger than major galactic powers, was staggering. You're claiming humanity has thousands of military vessels? Ambassador Crixon's crystalline form resonated with disbelief. Marcus shook his head. The Colonial Defense Force is only one branch of human military services. Each world maintains its own planetary defense forces. Earth itself has the Home Fleet, the Deep Space Patrol, and the Strategic Reserve. Strategic Reserve? General Korath leaned forward intently. Ships and personnel held back for major conflicts. The kind of force you deploy when someone threatens human space with 800 vessels and 12 super dreadnoughts. The council members exchanged alarmed glances. Ambassador Veltar used her telepathic abilities to sense Marcus's emotional state, searching for signs of deception or exaggeration. What she found was calm confidence backed by absolute certainty. You speak as if humanity has been planning for large-scale interstellar warfare, she observed. Marcus nodded. Humans learned early that the universe is a dangerous place. We've been preparing for threats we haven't even discovered yet. He gestured toward the star charts. The Zorith Dominion controls over 30 systems. The hegemony has 12. Various other powers hold territory throughout this region. Standard galactic politics, Ambassador Veltar confirmed. From a human perspective, you're surrounded by potential enemies. Large established powers with significant military forces and histories of territorial expansion. Marcus's expression became serious. Earth's Strategic Command has been developing contingency plans for every major galactic power since we first learned you existed. The revelation hit the Council like a physical blow. This species hadn't just stumbled into galactic civilization unprepared. They had been studying, planning, preparing for conflict from the moment of first contact. Contingency plans for what? Dr. Cathara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Marcus met her gaze directly. For what happens if diplomacy fails? If trade negotiations break down? If species like the Zorith decide that human worlds look like attractive targets? General Korath's scarred hide showed patterns of deep concern. You're describing preparation for multiple simultaneous wars. We're describing preparation for survival, Marcus corrected. Humans don't start fights, General. But we always finish them. The holographic display chimed with an incoming priority message. Ambassador Veltar accepted the transmission, and a new star chart appeared showing the Zorith core systems. The Zorith retaliatory fleet has begun moving, she announced grimly. Estimated arrival at human space, 14 standard days. Marcus studied the new tactical information with professional interest. 14 days. That's enough time. Enough time for what? Ambassador Crixon demanded. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, it carried genuine warmth. Enough time for... The private conference room adjoining the council chambers held an atmosphere thick with tension. 5 hours had passed since Marcus's address to the full assembly, and now the inner circle of council leadership sat around a curved table, reviewing classified intelligence reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Ambassador Veltar manipulated the holographic display with practiced ease, bringing up star charts showing the Outer Rim territories. Red markers indicated Zorith-controlled systems, while new yellow indicators marked recent communication blackouts and missing reconnaissance patrols. The situation is evolving rapidly, she announced to the assembled inner council. In the 72 hours since the Zorith sector fleet was destroyed, we've lost contact with 3 border monitoring stations and 2 diplomatic missions. General Korath of the Council Defense Force leaned forward, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak ominously. The Betharian military leader had commanded galactic peacekeeping forces for 2 decades, and his scarred hide bore witness to numerous conflicts with rogue systems. The Zorith High Command is mobilizing, he rumbled in his deep voice. Long-range sensors detect massive fleet movements from their core systems. Conservative estimates place their response force at over 800 vessels, including 12 super dreadnoughts. Ambassador Crixon's crystalline form refracted nervous patterns of light. They're preparing to eliminate the human threat before it can spread. Standard Zorith doctrine calls for overwhelming force when dealing with unknown capabilities. Which brings us to the central question, interjected Ambassador Orthani of the Traitor Consortium. The diminutive being's large eyes showed concern for the economic implications. How many humans are there? 1 system? 10? The economic disruption from a full-scale interstellar war could collapse the Outer Rim trade networks. The question hung in the air. Despite 3 days of interrogation and analysis, human capabilities remained largely unknown. Marcus had provided basic information about his species' expansion into space, but the numbers seemed impossible to verify. The human claims his species has established colonies on 47 worlds, General Korath said, consulting his tactical datapad. Population estimates range from 20 to 50 billion individuals across multiple star systems. And their military strength? Ambassador Veltar asked, unknown. The human speaks of defense fleets but provides no specific numbers. When pressed, he simply says that humanity believes in being prepared for trouble. Dr. Kithara, who had been granted special access to the inner council due to her extensive contact with Marcus, activated her own display. I've been analyzing the wreckage patterns from the destroyed Zorith fleet. The weapon signatures don't match any known technology, but they're not particularly advanced either. Explain, General Korath commanded. Human weapons appear to be variations on nuclear fusion reactions, kinetic projectiles, and directed energy beams. Nothing exotic, nothing beyond current galactic understanding. The difference lies in application and tactics. She manipulated the display to show detailed scans of destroyed Zorith vessels. Look at these impact patterns. The humans didn't just destroy the ships. They systematically targeted life support, communication arrays, and escape systems. Every shot was calculated to maximize psychological impact on survivors. Ambassador Crixon's light patterns shifted to deep unease. Psychological warfare on this scale suggests extensive military planning. This wasn't a spontaneous response to aggression. That's what concerns me most, Dr. Kithara admitted. Marcus speaks of the battle as if it followed established human doctrine. They have protocols for this kind of total warfare. They've planned for fighting against overwhelming odds. The inner council fell silent, contemplating the implications. A species that had developed doctrine for genocide-level warfare was far more dangerous than one that had simply committed an isolated atrocity. Ambassador Veltar opened a secure communication channel. Bring the human to the conference room. We need direct answers. Minutes later, Marcus entered accompanied by Commander Thexol and 2 guards. The human showed no signs of fatigue despite days of constant questioning. If anything, he seemed more alert, more focused than before. Sit, General Korath commanded, indicating a chair facing the council members. Marcus remained standing. I prefer to stand, General. Thank you. The refusal was polite but absolute, and several council members recognized it as a subtle assertion of independence. This human would not be intimidated by formal protocol or military authority. We've been analyzing the intelligence you've provided, Ambassador Veltar began carefully. However, significant questions remain about human capabilities and intentions. Ask your questions, Marcus replied simply. General Korath activated his tactical display. Long-range sensors show massive Zorith fleet movements. Conservative estimates suggest they're preparing a retaliatory strike with over 800 vessels. How will humanity respond to this level of threat? Marcus studied the fleet disposition charts with professional interest. That's a significant force. The Zorith are taking us seriously. That's not an answer, Ambassador Crixon interjected. Can humanity defend against such numbers? The Zorith made a mistake at Haven's Rest, Marcus said quietly. They assumed that because we're new to galactic politics, we must be weak. They're making another mistake now, which is? Ambassador Veltar prompted. Marcus turned to face the full council. They assumed that what happened to their sector fleet was the limit of human capability. That 26 ships represented a significant portion of our military strength. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Kethara felt her 4 hearts begin racing as the implications became clear. How many ships does humanity actually possess? General Korath asked, though his voice suggested he dreaded the answer. The Colonial Defense Force maintains active fleets around 47 human worlds, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. The 3rd Colonial Fleet that engaged at Haven's Rest was considered one of our smaller formations. Ambassador Orthani's large eyes widened. Smaller formations? How many ships constitute a full human fleet? That depends on the mission profile. A standard colonial defense fleet typically fields between 60 and 120 vessels. Heavy assault fleets are larger. The numbers didn't match galactic norms. Most species maintain small, technologically superior fleets. The idea of multiple formations, each larger than major galactic powers, was staggering. You're claiming humanity has thousands of military vessels? Ambassador Crixon's crystalline form resonated with disbelief. Marcus shook his head. The Colonial Defense Force is only one branch of human military services. Each world maintains its own planetary defense forces. Earth itself has the Home Fleet, the Deep Space Patrol, and the Strategic Reserve. Strategic Reserve? General Korath leaned forward intently. Ships and personnel held back for major conflicts. The kind of force you deploy when someone threatens human space with 800 vessels and 12 super dreadnoughts. The council members exchanged alarmed glances. Ambassador Veltar used her telepathic abilities to sense Marcus's emotional state, searching for signs of deception or exaggeration. What she found was calm confidence backed by absolute certainty. You speak as if humanity has been planning for large-scale interstellar warfare, she observed. Marcus nodded. Humans learned early that the universe is a dangerous place. We've been preparing for threats we haven't even discovered yet. He gestured toward the star charts. The Zorith Dominion controls over 30 systems. The hegemony has 12. Various other powers hold territory throughout this region. Standard galactic politics, Ambassador Veltar confirmed. From a human perspective, you're surrounded by potential enemies. Large established powers with significant military forces and histories of territorial expansion. Marcus's expression became serious. Earth's Strategic Command has been developing contingency plans for every major galactic power since we first learned you existed. The revelation hit the Council like a physical blow. This species hadn't just stumbled into galactic civilization unprepared. They had been studying, planning, preparing for conflict from the moment of first contact. Contingency plans for what? Dr. Kethara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Marcus met her gaze directly. For what happens if diplomacy fails? If trade negotiations break down? If species like the Zorith decide that human worlds look like attractive targets? General Korath's scarred hide showed patterns of deep concern. You're describing preparation for multiple simultaneous wars. We're describing preparation for survival, Marcus corrected. Humans don't start fights, General. But we always finish them. The holographic display chimed with an incoming priority message. Ambassador Veltar accepted the transmission, and a new star chart appeared showing the Zorith core systems. The Zorith retaliatory fleet has begun moving, she announced grimly. Estimated arrival at human space, 14 standard days. Marcus studied the new tactical information with professional interest. 14 days. That's enough time. Enough time for what? Ambassador Crixon demanded. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, it carried genuine warmth. Enough time for... The battle for the Proxima system began with a display of human tactical doctrine that would be studied in military academies for generations. Instead of the direct assault that galactic observers expected, the human fleet executed a coordinated attack that demonstrated centuries of strategic evolution. Dr. Cathara watched from the Council Station's observation deck as the tactical display showed human vessels moving in patterns that seemed to defy conventional military logic. Rather than concentrating firepower on the largest Zorith vessels, they targeted specific systems across the entire enemy formation. They're not trying to destroy the dreadnoughts, General Korath observed with growing amazement. They're systematically disabling command and control capabilities. Marcus stood beside the massive holographic display, his expression focused and professional. Human military doctrine evolved from fighting wars where we were usually outnumbered. We learned that destroying enemy ships isn't as important as destroying their ability to fight as a coordinated force. The effectiveness of this approach became clear as the battle progressed. Zorith vessels, their communication arrays severed and sensor systems blinded, began operating independently. The disciplined formation that had entered the system dissolved into scattered groups of ships, each fighting its own isolated battle. Fascinating, Ambassador Veltar murmured, her telepathic senses picking up the emotional undertones from the assembled observers. They're turning the Zorith numerical advantage against them. What happened next surprised even Marcus. Instead of pressing their attack against the confused Zorith ships, significant portions of the human fleet began withdrawing to defensive positions around the colony world. They're pulling back? Ambassador Crixon's crystalline form resonated with confusion. Why would they disengage when they have the advantage? Marcus studied the tactical display more carefully. Then his expression shifted to something approaching admiration, because they're not just fighting this battle. They're setting up for the next one. The reason became clear moments later. The Zorith intelligence probes that had been quietly mapping human defensive positions suddenly activated powerful transmission arrays, broadcasting everything they had recorded directly toward Zorith space. The probes are transmitting, Commander Thexol announced urgently, compressed data packets containing detailed scans of human ship configurations, weapon capabilities, and tactical formations. The observers watched as dozens of small contacts accelerated away from the battle zone, carrying their intelligence payload toward the borders of Zorith space. Several human vessels moved to intercept, but the probes had been designed for this mission. They were small, fast, and difficult to target. The Zorith will have complete tactical intelligence about human capabilities within hours, General Korath said grimly. This changes everything. But Marcus was shaking his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Actually, it changes nothing, because the intelligence those probes collected isn't real. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Cathara was the first to understand the implications. The human ships they scanned, they're decoys? Not decoys, testbeds. Experimental platforms designed to look like standard human military vessels while carrying completely different weapon systems and defensive configurations. Marcus gestured toward the tactical display. Those probes just spent hours recording detailed scans of ships that represent maybe 5% of actual human naval capability. Ambassador, Veltar felt waves of shock emanating from the assembled observers as the full scope of human strategic thinking became clear. You deliberately allowed them to gather false intelligence. We allowed them to gather the intelligence we wanted them to have, Marcus corrected. When the Zorith High Command analyzes this data, they'll develop tactical plans based on fighting an enemy that doesn't actually exist. The battle in the Proxima system was reaching its conclusion. Cut off from coordination and overwhelmed by human tactics they couldn't counter, Zorth vessels began surrendering individually. The massive dreadnoughts, their escort screens decimated and their command systems disabled, found themselves surrounded by human ships whose true capabilities remained completely unknown. Zorth fleet casualties: 67 vessels destroyed, 43 vessels disabled. Current surrenders: 86 vessels. Commander Thexal read from his tactical assessment. Human casualties: 12 vessels with minor damage, no vessels lost. The numbers were staggering. In less than 6 hours, humanity had effectively destroyed one of the largest military formations the galaxy had seen in decades while suffering almost no losses in return. But the observers were beginning to understand that this battle had been fought on multiple levels simultaneously. While the Zorth had focused on tactical objectives, the humans had been playing a strategic game that extended far beyond the immediate conflict. The surviving Zorth vessels will be allowed to withdraw, Marcus announced, drawing surprised looks from the military observers. They'll carry word back to their high command about human military capabilities. False word, Dr. Cathara clarified. Carefully crafted false word, Marcus agreed. The Zorth leadership will receive 3 different sources of intelligence about today's battle: the probe data, survivor testimony, and their own tactical analysis. All 3 will paint a consistent picture of human military strength that happens to be completely wrong. General Korath's scarred hide showed patterns of grudging respect. You're manipulating them into making strategic errors based on false assumptions. We're giving them enough rope to hang themselves with, Marcus replied simply. Human strategic doctrine has always emphasized letting enemies defeat themselves whenever possible. The tactical display updated to show the broader strategic situation. Zorth fleets throughout their empire were responding to news of the Proxima battle by repositioning forces and adjusting tactical formations based on the intelligence they had received. They're changing their entire military deployment, Ambassador Crixon observed with growing amazement, based on false information about human capabilities. Which means that when humanity decides to take more direct action, the Zorth will be positioned to defend against threats that don't exist while remaining vulnerable to tactics they can't imagine, Marcus explained. Dr. Cathara felt a chill of realization. More direct action? This wasn't humanity's real response to the Zorth threat? Marcus turned to look at her directly, and she saw something in his eyes that reminded her why predator species were so feared throughout the galaxy. Doctor, this was humanity saying hello to the Zorth High Command. Our real response is still being prepared. The communications array activated with an urgent priority signal. Ambassador Veltar accepted the transmission, and new tactical data began flowing into the display systems. Reports from across Zorth space, she announced, her voice tight with disbelief. Multiple star systems are reporting massive human fleet formations appearing at their borders. Hundreds of vessels, potentially thousands. The observers stared at the updating tactical displays in stunned silence. While everyone had been focused on the battle in the Proxima system, humanity had apparently been positioning forces throughout Zorth territory. How is this possible? General Korath demanded. Our intelligence indicated all major human fleets were concentrated in defensive positions. Your intelligence was based on what we allowed you to see, Marcus replied calmly. Just like Zorth intelligence. The colonial defense forces you've been tracking represent maybe 20% of actual human military strength. Ambassador Veltar used her telepathic abilities to scan Marcus's emotional state, searching for signs of deception or exaggeration. What she found was absolute confidence backed by detailed knowledge of capabilities she couldn't even imagine. What is humanity's actual military strength? She asked quietly. Marcus considered the question seriously. Enough to ensure that no species ever again makes the mistake the Zorth made at Haven's Rest. Enough to guarantee that attacking human civilians becomes too costly for any rational enemy to contemplate. The tactical displays updated again, showing Zorth defensive formations throughout their empire, scrambling to respond to human fleet movements. But their responses were all based on the false intelligence gathered at Proxima, leaving them vulnerable to attacks from directions they hadn't considered using tactics they couldn't predict. The Zorth Empire is about to collapse, Dr. Cathara realized with growing horror. You're not just defeating their military. You're destroying their entire civilization. Marcus's expression became thoughtful. That depends entirely on what the Zorith High Command decides to do in the next few hours. Humanity doesn't want to destroy civilizations, Doctor. We want to protect our own. But you're prepared to destroy them if necessary, Ambassador Crixon stated. We're prepared to do whatever is necessary to ensure the safety of human space, Marcus confirmed. The Zorith can choose to negotiate, withdraw from human territory and accept new boundaries for their expansion. Or they can choose to escalate this. 3 months after the Proxima incident, as galactic historians would later call it, the council chambers had been reconfigured to accommodate an unprecedented gathering. Representatives from 47 member species sat alongside delegations from 12 formerly independent systems, 3 refugee groups, and most remarkably, a formal Zorith diplomatic mission. Marcus stood once again at the speaker's platform, but this time he wore the formal blue uniform of the newly established Human Diplomatic Corps. The simple gray clothing was gone, replaced by insignia that marked him as Ambassador at Large for the United Colonies of Earth. More than his attire had changed. The entire atmosphere in the chamber reflected a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. Ambassador Veltar called the session to order, her telepathic abilities picking up emotional undercurrents of fear, respect, and curiosity from the assembled delegates. This emergency session of the Galactic Council will address the formal integration of humanity into galactic civilization and the proposed new territorial agreements following recent conflicts. The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of local space. The familiar boundaries had been redrawn dramatically. Where Zorith territory had once extended across 30 systems, their domain now comprised only their original 12 core worlds. The remainder had either declared independence, joined the human colonies, or requested council protection. Zorith Ambassador Krexval, his scaled hide showing patterns of controlled humiliation, rose to address the assembly. The Zorith High Command formally acknowledges the territorial adjustments proposed by the human delegation. We accept the withdrawal of all military forces from systems that have chosen alternative governance. The statement sent ripples of amazement through the chamber. 3 months ago, the Zorith Dominion had been one of the galaxy's most aggressive expansionist powers. Today they were accepting terms that amounted to the peaceful dissolution of their empire. Marcus activated the display controls, highlighting specific star systems. The human position has always been simple. Any world that chooses independence from the Zorith Dominion will receive protection and support. Any world that wishes to join the human colonies will be welcomed. Any world that prefers council oversight will have our full backing. Ambassador Crixon's crystalline form resonated with harmonic confusion. But what does humanity gain from this arrangement? You've essentially taken on the responsibility for defending dozens of systems with no apparent benefit. We gain security, Marcus replied simply. Every system that leaves the Zorith Dominion voluntarily is one less potential launching point for future attacks on human space. Every world that feels protected by human presence is an ally instead of a potential enemy. Dr. Kethera, now serving as the Council's chief military analyst, highlighted the strategic implications on the display. The new territorial arrangements create a buffer zone of friendly systems around human space. Any future aggressor would have to cross multiple layers of allied territory to reach human colonies. General Koreth studied the tactical implications with professional admiration. Brilliant strategic positioning. You've created a defensive network that makes direct assault on human territory virtually impossible. More than that, Marcus added, we've demonstrated that humanity prefers to gain allies rather than conquer territory. Every species in this room now knows that humans don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be left alone to protect our own people. The truth of this statement was evident in the dramatic changes that had swept across local space. The lightning-fast human military campaign that followed the Proxima incident had been characterized not by destruction and conquest, but by liberation and protection. When human fleets arrived at Zorith-controlled systems, they hadn't come as conquerors but as liberators offering protection to oppressed populations. Ambassador Lithara of the Peaceful Assembly activated her speaking protocols. The humanitarian records show that human forces actively protected civilian populations during the transition period. Zorith military installations were neutralized with minimal collateral damage, and civilian infrastructure was left intact. Humans understand the difference between soldiers and civilians, Marcus replied. The Zorth military represented a threat to human space. Zorth civilians were simply people trapped under an aggressive government they didn't choose. The statement highlighted one of the most remarkable aspects of humanity's integration into galactic civilization. Despite revealing military capabilities that dwarfed most established powers, they had consistently chosen diplomatic and humanitarian solutions over simple conquest. Commander Thexal, now serving as liaison between Council security and human forces, brought up detailed reports. Analysis of the 3-month transition period shows remarkable restraint from human military forces. Despite holding overwhelming tactical advantages, they consistently chose minimum force options and prioritized civilian protection. Because that's who we are, Marcus said, addressing the full assembly. Humans are capable of terrible violence when threatened, but we prefer to build rather than destroy. We'd rather have neighbors than subjects, allies rather than conquered territories. The communications array activated with an incoming priority transmission. Ambassador Veltar accepted the signal, and a new voice joined the assembly through the translation systems. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Home Fleet," the voice announced. "I'm transmitting from the bridge of the UHSS Constitution in orbit around Earth. I bring greetings from the United Colonies and an invitation to the Galactic Council." The implications were staggering. For the first time since humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, Earth itself was making direct contact with the Council. "Admiral Chen," Ambassador Veltar responded carefully, "the Council is honored by direct communication from your home world. What invitation do you bring?" The United Colonies formally invite the Galactic Council to establish a permanent diplomatic mission on Earth. We offer to host the first interspecies cultural exchange, where representatives from all member species can visit our homeworld and learn about human civilization firsthand. The offer sent waves of excitement through the assembled delegates. Despite 3 months of intensive contact, Earth itself remained mysterious to most galactic species. The chance to visit humanity's homeworld represented an unprecedented opportunity for cultural and scientific exchange. Dr. Kithara leaned forward with interest. "Admiral, what would such an exchange involve?" Admiral Chen's response carried a note of warmth that seemed characteristic of human communication. "Full cultural immersion programs, tours of human cities, visits to historical sites, participation in human educational institutions. We want the galaxy to understand not just human military capabilities, but human culture, art, philosophy, and values." Ambassador Crixon's harmonic patterns shifted to curiosity. "Would Council delegations have unrestricted access to your world?" "Within reason," Admiral Chen replied. "Obviously, certain military installations would remain restricted, but civilians and diplomats would have the same access rights as human citizens. We want you to see how we really live, not just how we fight." The offer represented a level of openness that no major galactic power had ever demonstrated. The idea of unrestricted access to an entire civilization's homeworld was almost unprecedented in galactic diplomacy. Marcus stepped forward to address the assembly directly. "The invitation reflects humanity's fundamental approach to galactic relations. We believe that understanding prevents conflict, that cultural exchange builds lasting peace, and that the best way to ensure security is to have friends instead of enemies." Over the following hours, the Council delegates asked hundreds of questions about human civilization, technology, and intentions. Marcus answered with the same directness that had characterized all his interactions with the galactic community, providing detailed information about human society while maintaining appropriate security boundaries. As the session neared its conclusion, Ambassador Veltar posed the question that had been underlying all the discussions. "Ambassador Marcus, humanity has demonstrated capabilities that could theoretically threaten every major power in the galaxy. What assurances can you provide that humans will continue to pursue peaceful coexistence?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his response carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of speaking for his entire species. "Ambassador, I can't provide guarantees about what humanity might do if faced with existential threats. What I can tell you is what we want to do." He gestured toward the territorial display. "We want to build homes for our families. We want to explore the galaxy and learn from other species. We want to trade knowledge in culture and art. We want our children to grow up in a universe where being human isn't a disadvantage or a target." He paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. But I can also tell you this. Humanity learned long ago that the best way to keep peace is to be prepared for war. The fleets that defended human space against the Zorith threat aren't going anywhere. The defensive preparations that protected our colonies will be maintained and improved. Because while we hope for the best, we all